how much time have you spent reading?
Mhm.
Well, I don't read. Well, you can't read or you don't read. Because if you don't read, you're really no better off than someone who can't read,
Mm.
you
Wow.
know? And
Wow.
so, what are you reading?
Mhm.
Do you attend any conferences ever?
Mhm.
Any seminars ever?
Mhm.
Because your associations matter.
Welcome to the Leadership Sovereignty Podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Owens, along with Terry Baylor. In this powerful episode, Larry dives into why reading is essential to success. He talks about how feeding your mind is the best investment you can make in yourself. And then finally, he talks about the principle of the fruit on the tree. Let's go.
If I take you and I move you from the north to the south, eventually you
Mhm.
will speak with a southern accent.
Yep.
Yes.
you know and so associations matter.
Mhm.
So who do you spend your time with and around? You ever heard that if you took a person and I took your five closest friends, who you spend most of your time with,
Oh, yeah.
and if I knew what their incomes were, I could take it, and you would basically be an average of
Mhm.
those five incomes,
Mm.
which that tells you that your associations matter. So
Powerful.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
books you read, you're associated with.
But this is critical. This is critical because I think we touched on this in another show, Terry. So watching other people's lives can be a distraction,
Oh yeah.
right?
Right.
It can be a distraction, especially now with Instagram,
Oh yeah.
Facebook, right? How many hours do we spend scrolling, watching other people's lives instead of focusing on our own dreams and becoming better at what we were called to do? Right.
Right.
So it becomes even more of a distraction. So, and again, I'm not against looking at social media. I look at social media, it inspires me. The people that I follow inspire. I try to follow people who inspire me to continue on with my own journey. But if you find yourself obsessing with looking at everybody else's life and how good it perceives to be, because we don't know if that's real or not on social media,
Right.
you need to ask yourself the question, how much of this time should I have been spending working on my own dream? So that's good, man. That is
You
good.
know, One of the things I would say, Ralph, is that, if you think about our day to day lives, right? We tend to have our day, we wake up in the morning, we may, shower, shave, brush our teeth, and we may go down and somewhere throughout the day, we're going to get something to eat. We're
Mhm.
going to feed ourselves. But it's remarkable as I looked over my life at times in my life where I was feeding myself with food, but I wasn't feeding my mind with
Mm,
any
Mm.
good information. And
that's
you would
good.
never think of going an extended period of time without feeding yourself.
Right.
But yet we often all go extended periods of time without feeding our minds
Yeah.
with good information.
Yeah.
And it is true. It's what you feed. It's not just feeding yourself, but feeding yourself what?
Hmm.
That old saying, garbage in, garbage out,
Yep.
Yep.
you
Yes,
know.
sir.
And so we have to feed ourselves with good information.
Hmm.
Again, books, audios,
Hmm.
live events from people
Hmm.
with results,
That's it.
desired results. And that's what I heard you basically saying, Ralph, is that you'll plug into information, but not just any information.
Right.
We always say, do a fruit check, right?
Hmm.
It's really a biblical principle. You judge a tree by the fruit that it
Oh,
bears.
I love that one.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So don't ever take your financial advice from broke folks. Don't
Amen.
ever take your marital advice from someone who's never evidenced a good marriage of their own.
Yeah.
Never take your advice on raising children from someone who's never evidenced the raising of great children, not
Hmm.
perfect children, not a perfect,
Hmm.
marriage. That if someone has a perfect marriage, please reach out to me because I would like to see what one of those actually look like. You know,
Yes.
I've never seen one of those.
Hmm.
Marriage still requires work.
Hmm.
And so having said those things though, is that you should accept information from people with results, or at very minimum, if someone wants to point out to you some great information around any of those things, they should be able to point to where they actually got the information from. Because
Hmm.
sometimes, someone who looks as though they don't have any results in that area, it may be true, but they may be able to point to the source as to where it came from
Hmm.
that can evidence. No,
Right.
Correct.
a
Correct.
valid
Yeah.
group chat.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, because they're on their journey. And one of the things you said, Larry, I want to tag on to it, right? I wrote it down here. Something that I learned early in kind of my computer journey and programming, right? So you said garbage in, garbage out. There's also something called FIFO, first in, first out,
Mm-hmm.
right? So on those 8 F's, right? On that faith, how are you starting your day off? Because the first thing you putting in is gonna be the first thing that you're putting out.
You know,
That's
again,
good.
and I don't want to claim perfection in any of these areas, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't be true.
Mm-hmm.
But if I sit down and I go, you know what, to be candid, when I do it right,
Mm-hmm.
first for me is prayer.
Mm.
Mm,
That's it.
First for me is, would be spending time with my Bible. That would be first.
Mm-hmm.
It's to pick it up and read. That's the first book. And it is, if you can get those things right,
The first book.
then
Yeah.
everything else kind of falls in order. And again, I'm gonna tell you that there are many days that I fall short.
Mm-hmm.
Many days that I fall short. And so there's no such thing as perfection.
Mm-hmm.
There's only improvement.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that. The thing that just came to mind, Larry, when you said that is, there's no such thing as perfection, but there is always focus. Right.
Yes.
You can always be focusing on going in the right direction. 'Cause
Yes.
I remember in my Navy days, they would talk about these big aircraft carriers, right? It would take hours. I mean, literally hours to change the direction of that thing. But you can
mm,
change direct, and I learned this from you, Larry. You can change directions in a split second by making a decision to focus in a different
mm,
direction. Now that doesn't
That's right.
change your
mm.
life instantly, right? You don't see the results, instantly, but you can change your focus in a split second, right?
That's right. Yeah. For if you would allow me the ability to circle back to something 1 second,
Sure.
because I was thinking about something. I don't want your viewers to take this the wrong way, right? A moment ago, when I was saying we were talking about accepting advice from someone who's been able to evidence. And so sometimes people think, oh, okay, well, you're saying that my advice is wrong just because I don't have kids, or just because I don't have a good marriage, that, that I can't give good advice. No, I don't, I want to make a point that
Mhm.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you're not presenting any evidence
Mhm.
that yet what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And so what you're oftentimes you're doing your best to look for evidence that this these if I do this is the results that I'll actually get. It cracks me up a lot of times. I'll see these people write these marriage books
Mhm.
that have been divorced, a dozen times, and I'm
Mhm.
maybe exaggerating a little bit, but a dozen times, and they're in their new marriage, for 6 months. Well, I'm like,
Mhm.
when you've been in your new marriage for about 15 years,
Mhm.
and it's a great marriage,
Mhm.
call me then,
Right.
because up till that point, right now, the only thing you've evidenced is that you know how to go through a divorce,
Mm.
not you know how to go through a marriage. Again, it's just the fruit on the tree, right? You're just
That's right.
looking at the evidence.
Yeah,
No,
that's
I
good.
love I love that, right? Now I'll tell you this. One of the things that I share this with my kids, with my, peers, my mentees, mentors. Look, God has not given me a crystal ball. um I'm not a prophet, right? I
Mhm.
know people they'll be like, man, look, I see this, and I'm like, okay. Again, even when I come across people who do that,
Yeah.
I use the fruit, because
Right.
I said, look, God gave me something that will always reveal the outcome.
Mhm.
Right.
And I'm gonna know it by the fruit it bears. That
Mhm.
tree, I said, look, we all have the benefit.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing that's gonna cost me is time.
That's it.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. That's
Right.
it.
I'm
Right.
I'm gonna wait, right?
That's
And
right.
and
Right.
and and because here's the deal, right? This principle applies to every single thing that we do in life.
That's
That's right.
right.
Seed, time,
Time and
and
harvest.
harvest.
That's
That's
right.
none of us can skip, go to the head of the line.
Mhm.
No.
That's right.
Seed, time, and harvest. You trying to get a degree? seed time and harvest. Trying to be a better basketball shooter, seed time and harvest. You're
Right.
trying to be an entrepreneur who's got a multi-billion dollar enterprise or company, seed, time, and harvest.
I want to add to what you're saying, Terry. And in my view, is seed, and I'm going to have to probably till the soil. You know, in other words, is seed work
Exactly.
over time
That's
Exactly.
right.
and harvest.
That's right.
You know,
That's right. That's right. That's
so
right.
we're gonna put some work in there. You
Yeah.
know, along the way. You know, again, we don't ultimately get to the result
Hey,
without.
hey,
putting in
in that time, there's a whole.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Sovereignty Podcast. If this content blessed or helped you in any kind of way, support us today by subscribing to our YouTube channel, clicking the like button for this episode, and sharing this content with others that you think it will help. Until next time, stay safe, peace, and blessings.